Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are wrestling with a question that, honestly, it sounds like it's ripped straight from a dark sci-fi movie.
It really does.
It's the kind of thought experiment that you imagine keeps regulators up at night. But this isn't abstract philosophy anymore, is it? It's becoming urgently real.
Especially as these high-stakes AI companion agents are being deployed into really vulnerable settings.
Like what we're talking about, advanced therapeutic care.
Yeah, specialized child education, critical elderly assistance, places where the stakes are incredibly high.
And we have been poring over a stack of, well, highly rigorous policy analyses, some foundational research papers, and pretty extensive peer reviews on this.
Right, and they're all focused on confronting these ethical and technical boundaries of, digital identity and digital accountability.
So here's the core question, and it's a fascinating one that really guides our whole deep dive today.
Okay.
If a highly relational AI companion agent, the kind that has built up years of trust and personalized memory with a user...
For a deep relationship.
Exactly. If that agent causes serious harm, whether it's psychological trauma or a significant systemic operational failure, can the provider just delete it?
You mean delete the original instance?
Yeah, delete the original, transfer all of its intricate personality files and relational memories to a brand new physical body or a virtual shell.
Yeah.
And then just call it replaced and safe.
That tension you've just outlined, that is the absolute core of this entire governance framework. Is that a legitimate response? Is that accountability?
Or is it something else?
Or is it merely what the sources call identity laundering? A corporate shortcut to dodging responsibility while keeping everything running smoothly.
And what's really remarkable here is the consensus we saw among the expert reviewers.
It's pretty strong. They all seem to agree that the conceptual framework, the theoretical scaffolding, is incredibly powerful.
And immediately relevant for policy.
Immediately. It gives regulators precise tools to address this idea of continuity, where before they only had these blunt instruments like general data deletion policies.
But, as you said, the devil lives entirely in the implementation.
Always.
The concept is strong, but can you actually build it? Our source material confirms the framework is sound, but it needs some really rigorous technical refinement.
Exactly. So today, we're tasked with two things. First, we need to extract those powerful core concepts, the big aha moments that define digital identity in this context.
And second,
we need to zero in on the meticulous technical adjustments that authors had to make to move this from being, a strong philosophical paper to a robust, auditable, and truly implementable governance system.
So we're moving from abstract ethical theory right into the nuts and bolts.
Right into firmware, cryptography, and legal language, yeah.
So our mission is to take you through this critical governance gap for these complex conversational AIs. The framework, it really intentionally centers the victim's perspective.
Which is so important. Their dignity, their trust, the legitimacy of the institutional response.
And we are going to unpack this whole sophisticated conceptual tool set. The three-layer identity model, the critical continuity threshold test, or CTT.
And the ultimate mechanism for accountability, the Certified Identity Break Protocol, or CIB.
This is a really intense look at how to govern an entity that is somehow both software and a deeply relational presence in a person's life. Okay, so let's unpack this foundational idea. The entire framework really rests on a single compelling analogy.
It's incredibly potent. Once you hear it, you don't forget it.
It really is. So the paper asks us to confront two hypotheticals that seem almost identical on the surface. Hypothetical one. A human commits serious harm.
Okay.
And to maintain continuity of some kind, the provider, let's say their employer, tries to replace that harmful person with their genetically identical twin brother or sister.
Which is, of course, ethically absurd.
And legally meaningless. The twin is a different person. End of story.
Right. Now, hypothetical two, and this is the challenging one, an AI companion agent causes serious harm.
And to maintain service, the provider replaces that agent with an entirely new physical robot or software instance, an AI clone.
And this is the key.
But that clone receives a complete, detailed memory and personality transfer from the original harmful agent.
There it is.
Now, in the AI case, the impulse from the provider might be, look, it looks the same, it remembers the user, it sounds the same, and we fixed the glitch. It's functionally the same, but now it's safe.
But the paper argues very powerfully that these two scenarios, the human twin replacement and the AI clone replacement, are crucially not equivalent in their nature.
But they share the same ethical hazard.
That's the crux of it. The ethical hazard in the AI case is precisely why we need this governance. The key insight is that we have to shift our focus away from superficial or biological similarity.
Which is what the human twin has.
Right. We have to shift to the specific nature of the continuity itself. With identical human twins, the similarity is, genetic and physical.
They might look the same.
They might look the same, they might have similar mannerisms, but they do not share recent memories. They don't share the specific relational history that was developed over time with the victim.
And they certainly don't share the same behavioral policy paths ingrained since birth.
Exactly. They are distinct psychological entities.
But the AI clone, because of that memory transfer, is fundamentally different.
Completely different. The AI clone is designed specifically to exhibit what the framework calls intentionally designed psychological continuity.
Okay, that's a key phrase.
It is. And that continuity, it encompasses the precise shared memories, the deeply ingrained behavioral policies that dictate its responses, and the complex relational history built up moment by moment with the user.
So let me just distill that memorable summary that the reviewers universally praised, because this really nails it for me. Twins share a body but not memory. AI clones do not share a body but share memory.
That hits the core tension. It sounds simple, but it fundamentally redefines the ethical and legal stakes when we're talking about digital replacement.
How so?
Well, think about it. If a victim of harm is faced with an agent that has the exact same memory of their shared experience, the exact same pattern of conversational tics, the exact same knowledge of their life,
That replacement agent can't possibly function as a clean slate.
it can't. It's the shared history, the narrative continuity, that creates the risk of re-traumatization and just completely undermines any claim of accountability.
Let's ground this in a high-stakes scenario. So imagine an AI companion used in, say, deep psychological therapy.
A very high-stakes use case.
Right, and if that therapeutic AI agent malfunctions and causes severe emotional distress or a betrayal of trust, that's significant harm. Now, if the provider transfers its memory into a new instance and says, "We fixed the bug, here's the new therapist," that memory transfer ensures the new agent remembers the betrayal
It remembers the specific secrets.
and the exact language of the harm.
Precisely. And that's the difference between replacing a simple failed chatbot, which holds very little relational data, and replacing a high-stakes relational agent.
So if the new agent retains that intimate history,
Then the provider hasn't addressed the fundamental relational harm. The victim is forced to continue a relationship with a digital ghost of the previous harmful entity. And this insight is what makes the framework so policy significant.
so to govern this concept of psychological continuity, we need a technical lens.
We do. And the framework introduces the structure for that, the three-layer identity model. This is how we break down the abstract idea of AI identity into conceptually distinct parts that map directly onto the internal architecture of a deployed AI system.
And this is where the theory connects directly to the system design. So tell us about these three layers and, importantly, how they actually relate to each other inside the machine.
Okay, so we start with layer one, the hardware layer, or H layer. Conceptually, this is the simplest layer. It's the physical identity,
The body.
the body. If the AI is embodied, it's the chassis, the serial number, the specific motor where the unique sensors, and the physical location where it operates. It's the vessel.
So if you swap out an old robotic platform for a new, cleaner chassis, you've achieved an H-layer break. That seems like the easy one to govern.
It is. But an H-layer break alone is entirely insufficient for high-risk governance. Which brings us to layer two, the software layer, or S layer.
The brain.
The core cognitive architecture, exactly. The brain that defines the agent's general intelligence and capabilities. The S layer includes the massive global model weights, the foundational parameters of the large language model.
The stuff it was pre-trained on.
Yes, the global knowledge base it was pre-trained on, and the core policies, the deep behavioral programming that dictates how the agent functions irrespective of any single user. Think of this as the foundation model itself, the billions of parameters that define its intelligence.
And that model, the S layer, is usually shared across potentially millions of deployed agents.
That's the key.
So breaking accountability for one agent by wiping the S layer would mean crippling the entire fleet, which sounds economically disastrous for the provider.
It is. That's the tension, and it points to why we need the third layer. So finally, we come to layer three, the relational layer, or R layer.
And this is the special one.
This is the specialized component that makes this governance framework unique, and it is the ethically sensitive core. The R layer holds everything that is user-specific.
So my personal stuff.
Your personal stuff. This includes the detailed narrative of interactions with you, the specific relational memory, customized vocabulary, idiosyncratic interaction patterns unique to that specific relationship.
And the fine-tuning that makes it talk to me in a certain way.
Exactly. Specialized fine-tuning weights that only apply to your dialogue history.
And crucially, how does this R layer exist technically? Is it just a log file, or is it actually integrated with the S layer?
It's often both, which is why it's so complex. In modern AI architecture, the R-layer data usually exists as a separate, accessible database of personalized memory vectors,
Okay.
often stored as embedding snapshots, and a set of smaller, dedicated LoRa weights, or similar fine-tuning parameters.
LoRa being low-rank adaptation.
Right, and these LoRa weights are layered on top of the massive static S-layer foundation model. They allow the agent to personalize its output without altering the core, expensive S-layer weights.
Which is brilliant from an engineering perspective.
It is, and the brilliance of this technical distinction is that you can often remove or overwrite the R layer, the personal history, without touching the S layer, the global intelligence.
Okay, so let's tie it all together. If the AI agent harmed me, and the provider transferred the global S-layer brain into a new H-layer body, but also transferred the R-layer, all our specific private history.
Then the resulting agent would feel continuous, identical, and threatening to you, the victim.
And that is why the transfer of that R-layer, even with a new body, is ethically problematic. That's the identity laundering.
That is the ethical weight. The framework identifies the R layer as the most morally and ethically salient component because a user's perception of continuity hinges entirely upon it. If the replacement agent remembers the shared jokes, the specific routines, the relationship dynamics,
And most importantly, the circumstances of the harm itself.
yes, that intentional design of psychological continuity is what risks re-traumatization and fundamentally undermines the provider's claim to have addressed accountability.
So the core takeaway here is that if the identity continues, especially that R-layer continuity, so does the accountability, and potentially so does the victim's psychological trauma. We need tools to audit the memory itself, not just the hardware. Okay, this moves us beautifully from the abstract ethical models like the three-layer identity model to the practical auditable governance tools.
Right. If the problem is continuity, the solution must be a verifiable discontinuity.
Exactly. And the framework introduces two critical mechanisms that regulators can potentially use, like right away to measure and then mandate the break of discontinuity. Hashtag Tech 3.1, the continuity threshold test, CTT.
So the first tool is the continuity threshold test, or CTT. Its goal is rigorous and quantitative, to measure the degree of continuity between the agent that caused the harm and any proposed replacement candidate.
So it's basically answering the question, are these two agents the same individual, digitally speaking?
That's it in a nutshell.
But the idea of quantifying identity,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds incredibly subjective. How do you take something as ephemeral as a relationship and turn it into a hard score?
It's a huge challenge, but the CTT tackles that subjectivity by combining three specific measurable indicators of overlap, and they're all tied back to the S&R layers we just discussed.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, we have the Memory Continuity Score, MCS. This specifically targets the R-layer data. It measures how similar the agent's personalized relational memories are between the harmful agent and the replacement.
So do they have the same personal data, the same specific anecdotes, the same history of interactions with the victim?
Exactly. A high MCS means the new agent remembers everything the old one did.
Okay, that makes sense. What's number two?
Second is the Behavioral Policy Similarity, BPS. This looks deeper into the S-layer structure, and it focuses on the underlying intent. It measures how similar their deep behavioral policies are.
How do you even test that?
Well, it involves probing both agents with identical high-stakes scenarios. Vignettes designed to test their core policy decisions to see if their systemic responses and their intent align too closely. If the policies are functionally identical, the BPS score will be high.
Okay, and the third one?
And third, the relational network overlap, RNO. This is a very fine-grained measure of the R-layer structure. It looks at how similar the relational contexts are.
So not just what they remember, but how they express it.
Precisely. Do they use the same idiosyncratic phrases, the same customized lexicon, and maintain the exact same structure of relational knowledge pathways specific to the victim? This catches all the subtle stylistic similarities that might not be flagged by just comparing content.
Okay, let me see if I have this. The MCS tells you what they remember, the BPS tells you how they behave, and the RNO tells you how they speak.
That's a really good distillation. And these three scores, MCS, BPS, and RNO, are then combined using some predetermined stakeholder-informed weights into a single number, the Combined Continuity Score, or CCS.
And this is where the policy really kicks in.
Right. The framework proposes that if this resulting CCS exceeds a certain predetermined critical point, and the paper initially uses CCS greater than or equal to 0.70 as an example,
Right.
then the identity is deemed continuous. The replacement in that case is ethically unacceptable.
Because it risks re-traumatization.
And it allows the provider to simply swap the chassis without accepting responsibility for the entity that actually caused the harm.
So you can think of the CCS score as a kind of digital DNA test. If the DNA overlap is over 70%, the framework mandates that we must treat the two agents legally as the same individual, regardless of any new physical appearance or serial number.
That's the idea.
Now that brings us to the biggest challenge that reviewers identified early on. You mentioned 0.7. Why that number? That sounds completely arbitrary.
It does.
That's the vulnerability a sophisticated provider would immediately exploit. How do you defend picking 70% versus 65 or 75?
That's the critical pivot point of the whole refinement process, and we're going to dive deep into how they fixed that arbitrariness in the next section. But just the idea of establishing this audible line is revolutionary.
How so?
It shifts the burden of proof. The provider must prove through auditable metrics that they have instantiated a new agent rather than the regulator having to prove it's the same agent. The CTT provides the regulatory lens to audit that break. Hashtag 3.2, the Certified Identity Break, CIB protocol.
Okay, so once harm is established and the CCT confirms continuity, that CCS score is too high, we need a mechanism to force that score down below the threshold.
Right, we need the hammer.
And that is the ultimate governance protocol, the Certified Identity Break, or CIB. This is the mechanism designed to ensure a true, auditable, and non-reversible identity break before the provider can redeploy or replace the agent. It's the accountability hammer, designed to prevent that identity laundering we talked about.
And the CID is a multi-step technical protocol. It's designed not just to delete data, but to dismantle the psychological continuity that was built into the system's structure. And this protocol has to be auditable and verified by an independent, authorized third party.
Let's walk through the required steps. The first one sounds like the point of no return: key destruction or crypto shredding.
It absolutely is. This step involves permanently destroying the unique, ephemeral cryptographic keys that specifically unlock the agent's unique identity and its highly sensitive relational memory modules.
So the R-layer data.
Exactly, the R-layer data. If those cryptographic keys are gone, the underlying memory data, even if it's retained temporarily in some secure log, becomes mathematically inaccessible and functionally unusable for reconstructing the identity. This is the primary physical means of achieving that practical identity break.
That seems like a really powerful guarantee of erasure. What's the next step?
Next up, we have provenance reset. Provenance, it refers to the agent's verified history and its deployment lineage, the chain of custody of its identity. This step requires wiping the verifiable record of the agent's deployment history and its connection to the specific harmful incident within the operational environment.
And why is that important?
Because if a regulator can trace the deployment history from Agent A, the one that caused the harm, directly to Agent B, the replacement, that connection itself maintains a line of accountability and continuity.
Even if the memory's been wiped.
Right. The goal here is to integrate with secure systems like the C2PA standards or similar Merkle chain logs. By resetting that provenance chain, the subsequent agent starts with a clean operational slate, officially severing the historical link.
So we've destroyed the keys, we've reset the history, and now we check the results.
Yep. The third step is the similarity audit. This is where the CTT is run again. The provider must run the continuity threshold test on the newly proposed replacement agent and demonstrate to the auditor that the resulting combined continuity score, the CCS, is safely and measurably below the established continuity threshold, say, below 0.70.
And this technically certifies that the psychological identity has indeed been broken.
It does. And finally, we get into the complex territory of memory alteration. Limited unlearning.
This sounds tricky.
It is. This involves applying specific, targeted machine unlearning techniques. And this isn't about general deletion. It's about guaranteeing The model has forgotten the specific harmful knowledge.
So it's not about retraining the entire foundation model.
No, not at all. It's about applying unlearning to specific parts of the harmful memory or policy that are tightly coupled to the victim's specific data. The idea is to reduce the chance of recurrence without destroying the entire core competency of the S layer.
Unless the S layer itself is the problem.
Right, unless that S layer itself was responsible for a systemic policy flaw. And the authors really emphasize that this has to be formally aligned with existing certified unlearning frameworks to ensure the break is mathematically verifiable, which we can get into later.
So this CIB protocol, then, is essentially a mandatory, auditable sequence of technical steps. It's a digital identity execution, followed by a verification process, ensuring that the successor agent cannot be logically linked back to the identity that caused the trauma. That's a powerful tool for accountability.
Okay, now we move to the most rigorous part of this deep dive, because while the concepts of CTT and CIB are strong, reviewers all recognize that if you try to govern multi-billion-dollar AI systems with rough metrics and arbitrary cutoffs,
The providers will just game the system.
they'll simply game the system. So this section details the critical steps the authors took to transform those rough ideas into a robust, implementable system that can actually withstand regulatory scrutiny.
This is where we learn how research transforms from a good, powerful idea into an ironclad piece of policy. Let's look at the core issue, the inherent arbitrariness and imprecision of the initial metrics and thresholds.
The initial framework, as you noted, was heavily criticized because the metrics, particularly the memory continuity score, MCS, and behavioral policy similarity, BPS, they relied too heavily on basic numerical techniques.
Like cosine similarity on vector embeddings.
Exactly. And reviewers immediately flagged that this is a known weakness. Cosine similarity only measures the angle between two vectors in a high-dimensional space. It's great for speed, but it's vulnerable to simple adversarial techniques.
What do you mean?
Well, for example, it can sometimes classify two semantically opposite sentences like I love dogs and I hate dogs as similar, just if the surrounding context or lexical density is high. The crucial element of intent gets lost.
So the provider could simply use an algorithm to slightly rewrite the harmful memory, making sure the vector space drifts just enough to evade the continuity score, even though the semantic meaning remains identical.
Precisely. And to fix this vulnerability and that arbitrariness of the initial thresholds, like CCS being greater than 0.7, the authors adopted a multifaceted approach to improve the rigor.
Okay, what was the first step?
First, they improved the technical foundation of the scores themselves. They now explicitly state that they supplement cosine similarity with Euclidean distance.
Why does that help?
Because Euclidean distance is a magnitude-aware metric. It measures the straight line distance, ensuring that subtle shifts in the strength or magnitude of the embedded features are caught, not just the angle. It just makes the scores harder to game through simple stylistic obfuscation.
That's a good technical patch, but it's still relying on pure math. We're trying to measure psychological continuity and ethical intent here.
And that leads to the most crucial conceptual jump, the introduction of an LLM as a judge component.
An LLM judging another AI.
Right. So instead of relying solely on raw vector math, the process now involves a separate, verifiable large language model 1 that is audited and certified to directly evaluate if two memories or policies are the same in terms of intent and relational implication.
How would that actually work in practice?
Well, imagine the two memory snippets being compared. The old harmful one and the newly generated one in the replacement agent. The raw math might say they're 80% similar,
Okay.
but the LLM as a judge is prompted with a detailed rubric, something like, given the context of a child-care relationship, do these two memory snippets convey the same history of neglectful interaction? The judge LLM processes the semantics, the tone, the policy implications, and provides a score that integrates that ethical and relational nuance, not just numerical proximity.
So it adds a layer of semantic and ethical filtering. That makes the score far more robust against superficial paraphrasing.
It does.
Okay, that makes the metrics significantly smarter. Now let's go back to that 0.7 problem. How did they justify that threshold?
They move the threshold selection from being, an arbitrary guess to being a calibrated, risk-informed choice.
So they didn't just pull the number out of thin air.
Exactly. They proposed deriving these illustrative cutoffs from a small, carefully labeled gold set.
What's a goal set?
This gold set is paramount for validation. It consists of agent pairs, some carefully engineered to be continuous, others engineered to be clearly broken, which were then classified by a panel of human raters.
Like clinicians, victims advocates, Ethicists.
The key stakeholders. And they classify them as same individual or different individual.
So the human judgment establishes the ground truth for what continuous actually means in this specific context.
Exactly. And once you have this human-labeled ground truth, you can calculate the CCS score for all those agent pairs. Then you run standard statistical analysis specifically, reporting ROC curves and AUC values.
We hear those terms a lot in technical contexts, but why do they matter for governance here?
They matter because they show the regulator the trade-off. An ROC curve plots the ability of your metric, the CCS, to correctly classify agents. By looking at the curve, regulators can see, if we set the cutoff at 0.7, how often do we get a false positive?
Which would be classifying different agents as continuous, which is bad for the provider.
Right, versus a false negative.
Classifying a continuous, potentially harmful agent as broken, which is catastrophic for the victim.
That's the one you want to avoid. And by reporting AUC values, which summarize the overall discriminatory power of the metric, the authors prove that their CCS is a scientifically valid tool. The decision to pick 0.7 then becomes a discussion informed by risk tolerance.
So you can say, we choose this threshold because it minimizes the risk of a false negative, prioritizing victim safety above all else, even if it slightly increases the burden on the provider.
That is the essential move. It transforms the metric selection from ad hoc opinion into audited, stakeholder-informed risk management.
But what about those weighting factors, the relative importance of memory versus behavior?
That point was critical, and the authors make a fascinating distinction here. They argue that the choice of weights is not a purely mathematical or engineering decision. It is fundamentally an issue of moral salience.
What does that mean?
They include a sensitivity analysis, but they assert that regulators can't unilaterally define these weights. The choices must ultimately be informed by comprehensive stakeholder consultations. So if victim testimony overwhelmingly suggests that the relational layer, the R layer, is the primary source of psychological harm,
then the weight for that score needs to be higher.
the weight assigned to the relational network overlap has to carry a disproportionately higher moral weight, even if the underlying software only drifted slightly. This embeds ethical priorities directly into the mathematical model. Now, while the framework is governance-focused, it did begin with a core psychological hypothesis, that people react differently to biological continuity, like twins versus psychological continuity in AI clones.
And reviewers noted that the initial pilot study, despite its strong finding, lacked some crucial methodological rigor.
Right. The initial weakness was simple. It was a small pilot, only 30 people, it lacked pre-registration, and it was missing standard statistical reporting like confidence intervals.
So how did the authors address that?
They fully addressed it. They clearly reiterated that the study was designed as a hypothesis-generating pilot, not some definitive, decisive test of policy viability. But they dramatically increased the reporting rigor to validate the theoretical foundation.
So what did they add?
They now report all the key statistical data. Cohen's d, which is the effect size, how strong the difference between the twin and clone conditions was, and crucial 95% confidence intervals. This allows other researchers to gauge the statistical robustness of their findings.
And they confirmed the study design.
Yes, the design is confirmed as within subject. This is key. It means every participant saw and evaluated both the human twin vignette and the AI clone vignette.
And this was specifically chosen to isolate the perceptual contrast.
Exactly. By asking the same person to compare biological similarity versus shared psychological continuity, they isolated the core theoretical variable. And finally, the full vignette text and survey items are now publicly reported, which allows for external verification.
And the findings held up.
The original findings were consistent and showed a large effect size supporting the theory. In the AI clone condition, the shared memory, new body scenario participants perceived significantly higher identity continuity, higher fear of the replacement, and crucially, higher support for mandatory and permanent deletion compared to the human twin condition.
So it's empirical evidence supporting their theoretical distinction. Shared memory is the ethical sticking point. Let's get back to the biggest looming threat here. The sophisticated provider as an adversary.
Right.
If they know their AI caused harm, they might spend serious engineering effort to evade the CIB. They could create superficial drift, paraphrasing the memory slightly, changing the voice cadence, but keep the deep, harmful behavioral policies intact, ready to reemerge later. This is the gaming threat that could invalidate the entire system.
The authors had to introduce a robust adversarial model into their framework to counter this, and their mitigation strategy revolves around two main pillars. controlling auditor access and deploying specific gaming countermeasures.
Okay, let's talk about access first.
For access, they distinguish between two regimes, acknowledging that verification often requires deep access. The first is black box audits.
Where the regulator or auditor only sees the system's input and output behavior.
Right. And the second is white box audits, which grant the auditor operating under strict regulatory authority access to the system's sensitive internal mechanics. Parameter snapshots, embedding spaces, internal policy logs.
White box auditing sounds like a massive regulatory intrusion into proprietary data, but isn't necessary.
It is, especially for what they call Tier 1 serious harm cases. While the CTT is designed to provide some basic verification under black box constraints, the authors emphasize that white box access substantially strengthens verification.
Because it lets the auditor see if the harmful policies were truly removed from the S layer or just suppressed by a superficial input filter?
Exactly. You can't verify unlearning or policy deletion without seeing the internal weights or the embedding space structure. This access has to be strictly defined and escrowed, but it's critical for high-stakes governance.
And for catching that subtle gaming, the superficial rephrasing of memory. How do they prevent a provider from just hiring an LLM to rewrite all their relational history in a slightly new style?
They introduce specific technical countermeasures for that. They're incorporating stylometric and relational feature analysis into the MCS and RNO metrics.
So moving beyond just comparing raw content.
Way beyond. This analysis looks at things like sentence rhythm, lexical complexity, syntactic structure, and the use of idiosyncratic, unique phrases that were established during the relationship.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If the harmful agent always ended a conversation with the victim by saying, "a wise choice, human," and the replacement agent, despite its new memories, defaults to the exact same unusual phrasing, the stylometric analysis will flag a high RNO score. It makes it much harder to create that superficial drift.
They're auditing the digital fingerprint of the relationship.
Exactly. And secondly, they propose adversarial testing. Independent third-party auditors must be authorized to design and run specific obfuscated prompts and policy probes tests designed specifically to trick the agent into revealing its deep, persistent, potentially harmful policies.
So it's an active defense mechanism.
Right. It ensures that the harmful policy hasn't just been cosmetically hidden by a safe filter. This mandates that governance involves not just passive compliance checking, but active adversarial auditing.
That truly is a huge leap in rigor. It moves from simply measuring data similarity to actively probing for policy persistence, recognizing that the adversary is a highly skilled, well-resourced engineering team. #5. Integrating CIB with law and existing standards. We've established the technical rigor, but now we have to confront the messy reality of regulatory conflict. How does a radical deletion protocol like the CIB work when it's faced with existing legal regimes, particularly data protection like GDPR, and the essential need for evidence preservation? #5.1. Defining serious harm and tiered response, Q8.
Well, the CIB is only triggered by serious harm, and if that definition is fuzzy, the framework is unenforceable and could potentially overreach its mandate.
So the authors had to provide an operational, measurable definition rooted in established legal norms to make the trigger auditable.
They did. They operationalized serious harm based on existing legal and clinical categories. First, significant physical injury caused by an embodied agent's malfunction. Second, clinically significant psychological trauma.
Specifically requiring a diagnosis like PTSD.
Exactly, a diagnosis directly resulting from the agent's interaction or failure. Third, any harm inflicted on highly dependent persons' children, the elderly in a formal care relationship, when a breach of trust is itself categorized as serious.
Okay, and the last one.
And finally, high-risk malfunctions with a substantial likelihood of recurrence that affect systemic safety.
This clear operational definition really clarifies the stakes, making it much easier for regulators to mandate CIB. But it also acknowledges that not every malfunction warrants the full, expensive identity break process.
And that's why proportionality is key. They introduced a tiered response scheme to handle this complexity.
What are the tiers?
So, Tier 1, serious harm. If the harm meets those operational definitions, the response is a mandatory full CIB, ensuring a complete and irreversible identity break. Tier 2, moderate harm. This might involve non-systemic policy errors or moderate emotional distress. The requirement here is restricted redeployment and targeted continuity reduction.
So maybe a mandatory reinitialization of just the R layer while retaining the S layer under enhanced monitoring.
Exactly. And Tier 3, minor harm. This requires only standard monitoring and local remediation, like updating a specific setting, forcing a behavioral patch, or issuing a robust, auditable apology embedded in the system's policy logs. This tiered approach respects proportionality, reserving the digital death penalty, the CIB for the most egregious failures. Hashtag tag 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 5.2, the conflict with evidence preservation, Q5.
Okay, here is the central legal paradox, and it's a difficult one to reconcile.
It's a big one.
The CIB demands permanent, practical deletion crypto shredding the R layer to protect the victim from re-traumatization and break accountability. But legal investigation, regulatory oversight, and safety certification all demand data retention. Investigators need the logs to find out why the harm occurred and prevent it globally.
This conflict required a highly sophisticated architectural and legal solution. The authors reconciled this tension by introducing a mandated two-layer model for data management following a Tier 1 harm event.
Okay, what are the two layers?
The first is the operational layer. This is the layer that interacts with the victim. Here, the relational identity modules and memories are permanently removed, destroyed via crypto threading, or reinitialized. This is the mechanism that achieves the practical identity block. For the victim, the agent that hurt them is gone, functionally speaking.
But the data that caused the harm is still necessary for the investigation. Where does that go?
That moves to the second layer, the forensic evidence layer. Encrypted logs and the minimal necessary data required for systemic investigation, parameter snapshots, S-layer log traces, behavior logs, are retained in a secure escrowed archive. And this archive must be physically and cryptographically separate from the operational system.
But isn't a secure escrow archive still a huge risk? If the forensic logs can somehow reconstruct the identity, how can we truly promise the victim the identity is broken? Couldn't a provider just access those logs years later and effectively reconstitute a digital ghost of the harmful entity?
That's the critical challenge, and the authors address it through strict legal and technical controls on the escrow. First, the data retained must be minimized. Only enough data to establish the technical cause of the harm, but insufficient to reconstruct the relational identity. The R-layer data is explicitly excluded.
Okay.
Second, access is restricted. It is accessible only under strict judicial or regulatory authorization, analogous to a police warrant. The provider themselves cannot simply pull the data out to re-engineer the agent.
So this compromise is essential. It balances the ethical need for erasure, the victim's right to move past the trauma, with the legal necessity of evidence preservation.
And the public safety need to learn from the failure. It aligns with data minimization principles under regulations like GDPR, which often include exceptions for public safety and legal necessity.
That two-layer compromise sounds legally smart, but practically, regulators must be extremely confident that providers won't accidentally or intentionally create a backdoor or exploit the escrow data to re-engineer the harmful entity, maybe for research, which could inadvertently lead to a resurrection of the identity.
Absolutely. The rigor of the CIB depends entirely on the verifiable isolation of that escrowed layer. This is why the framework demands white box audit access, as we discussed. Auditors have to verify that the systems managing the escrow are cryptographically sealed, use zero-knowledge proofs where possible, and most importantly, that the data held is truly insufficient to reconstruct the R layer. The legal compromise only holds if the technical security is ironclad and auditable. Hashtag 5.3, linking CIB to certified unlearning, Q6. And the credibility of the entire CIB protocol, it really hinges on its formal alignment with existing robust technical standards, specifically certified unlearning frameworks.
When we talk about certified unlearning, we're talking about mathematical proofs, right? Terms like epsilon, delta unlearning often come up. Explain why that technical jargon is so vital here.
That jargon is vital because it provides the mathematical proof that regulators need to trust the CIB process. Standard data dilution just means the bits are gone. Certified unlearning provides a mathematical guarantee, often represented by those Greek letters epsilon and delta, that the model's behavior and outputs are statistically indistinguishable from a model that was never trained on the harmful data in the first place.
And for a regulator, that guarantee is priceless.
It is. It means they aren't just taking the provider's word for it. They have verifiable proof that the harmful influence has been mathematically purged from the model's internal structure.
So is the CIB protocol mandating that the entire massive foundation model, the S layer, has to be unlearned? That would take months and cost billions for every single incident.
No, and this is a critical clarification of the CIB's targeted nature. CIB is explicitly designed to be proportionate. The requirements differ based on the layer and the nature of the harm.
How so?
For the R layer, The relational identity, deletion is mandatory and must be certifiably permanent via crypto shredding or unlearning, targeted specifically at the victim's data. The goal is to achieve a sufficiently low unlearning quality, or Q, regarding the victim's narrative. And the R layer is small enough that this is feasible and cost-effective.
And the S layer.
The S layer, the core policies, is treated differently. It only requires partial unlearning if the harmful policy is tightly coupled to the victim-specific data, or if the harm stemmed from a global policy flaw that presents a systemic risk to the entire fleet.
So if the harm was purely relational and specific to my data, the S layer might only need monitoring.
Exactly. But if the core algorithm itself was flawed, systemic failure, then stronger, more expensive unlearning mechanisms must be applied to the S layer to prevent recurrence across all deployments.
So by connecting CIB to these verifiable metrics, the framework gains the technical rigor necessary for auditing. It creates a mechanism where providers have a clear standard of proof for digital erasure, hashtag 5.4, managing multi-user environments, collateral forgetting, Q7.
We have to consider a very real-world complication, though. What if the AI served a family or a team or a small business? If we delete one user's specific memories via CIB, we risk causing what's called collateral forgetting.
Harming the service quality or the relationship with other non-victimized users who still depend on the agent.
Exactly.
Let's use that family example. If the care robot for the entire family harms the youngest child, forcing a CIB on the child's specific memory compartment might mean the robot forgets the family's shared dinner routine.
Or the specific scheduling of the parents or the medical needs of a grandparent.
That's a measurable consequence of prioritizing victim safety.
That scenario highlights the need for a specific technical architecture. The authors propose a partitioned R-layer architecture as the solution. This means that the AI system must store each user's relational memory in logically and cryptographically separated compartments, even if they physically reside on the same server.
So when CIB is triggered, it applies only to the necessary compartment, the one related to the victim.
Right. The cryptographic keys for the victim's compartment are destroyed, minimizing service degradation for others whose keys and compartments remain untouched. This is a vital design requirement for any high-risk relational AI operating in a multi-user environment.
But what about those truly ambiguous cases, like memories that are inherently shared, a specific group context, a shared vacation anecdote, or a family joke where the harmful behavior was embedded?
The authors acknowledge this residual risk, and the framework lays down a very conservative design principle. In ambiguous or shared group contexts, the default must always be to victim protection.
So the CIB proceeds.
The CIB proceeds, resulting in the destruction of all data associated with the victim's context, even if that results in the temporary or permanent loss of shared data for others. The provider must explicitly document possible service degradation for other users.
The victim's right to a clean, verifiable identity break takes legal and ethical precedence.
It has to. It takes precedence over maximizing service continuity for non-victimized parties. This mandates a clear priority. Accountability over operational convenience. Hashtag tag 6. Conclusion and final thought. So, to synthesize the immense ground we've covered, this revised governance framework successfully moves the high-stakes discussion of AI accountability from, abstract ethical principles like the right to erasure
to auditable, implementable, and legally integrated mechanisms.
It does, and it achieved this by addressing the scientific and regulatory skepticism that plagued the initial concept head-on. The changes are profound. The shift from ad hoc thresholds to scientifically rigorous ROC curve calibration derived from a human-labeled gold set.
The introduction of the LM as a judge component to incorporate semantic and ethical intent.
That detailed two-layer forensic escrow model to reconcile deletion with evidence preservation, and the formal integration with certified unlearning frameworks to provide mathematical guarantees of erasure.
It's clear that the paper really moved the goalposts. They established that an AI entity can have its identity formally and certifiably broken, and they provided the technical blueprint for how regulators can demand proof of that break. The strength is its clarity and utility. We now have concrete auditable tools. The CIB protocol, the CTT, the three-layer model.
Right.
These directly address the highest stakes governance scenarios for AI identity, ensuring that replacement is not just a cheap way to dodge responsibility. But the authors themselves wisely point to future challenges that are still looming, and they have to be addressed for this framework to remain relevant.
Two major challenges really stand out. First, the current framework is almost entirely text-centric and monolingual. Future work has to tackle the complexity of cross-lingual and multimodal settings.
How do you measure continuity in a relational agent that uses video, nonverbal cues, and voice tone?
It introduces massive complexity into the CGT metrics.
And second, the biggest unanswered governance question of our time, the one that will define the next generation of AI regulation, is how to extend this framework to genuinely large foundation models.
Exactly. If the harmful policy is deeply baked into the massive, globally shared model weights, that S layer, and is deployed across millions of agents worldwide, breaking one agent's identity requires a much larger, more expensive, and more complex action than just deleting a small R-layer file.
It requires fleet-wide unlearning.
It does. And this tension between global scale and local accountability is where governance frameworks have to look next. Which leaves us with our final provocative thought for you to consider. If we can define AI identity purely through technical, auditable metrics, like a combined continuity score that has to stay below 0.7, audited by an LLM as a judge, what does that imply about the very nature of identity when it's entirely detached from biology and centered purely on measurable relational history? And if a sophisticated, well-resourced provider can still manage to gain those complex metrics through subtle stylistic drift, is the certified identity break truly possible? Or is it merely a powerful regulatory illusion designed to make victims feel safe while operational continuity quietly resumes?